Welcome. This video is all about how to write your speech. Your week's assignment is about writing the speech in 3 parts. So if you think about it as if you were writing an essay, it's the same thing. You have your intro, your body, and your conclusion. So this week you're working on assignments where you actually write an intro, you write a body, and you write a conclusion. The topic is up to you, as long as you keep the same topic all the way through. So the intro. The intro has 3 parts. You have your attention getter, your thesis, and your preview. For your attention getter, it needs to be something that's going to grab your audience attention right from the start. So think about using a statistic, a quote, and maybe a story that you use throughout your speech. But it needs to be something. This is where we, the audience, choose whether we want to listen to you or not. So think of something really catchy that goes along with your speech. If it's a persuasion speech, you want to grab at our heartstrings. You really want to make sure that we understand and that we're with you. So think of it that way. Then you have your thesis. Just like if you were writing a paper, your thesis is the thing, the statement that is what your paper is all about. The same thing with a speech. I always say this: what do you want your audience to know at the end of your speech? Do you want to persuade us to do something? What is it? This is where your thesis comes into play. And then you have your preview of your 3 main points. This is just one statement where you simply state what your 3 main points are. Now, just a hint, a word to the wise. I don't want you to say things like, I'm here to inform you, I'm here to tell you, and I don't want you to say my first main point, my second, then my third, first, next, last, any kind of that language. I want you to think a little bit more creative. How can you say this without telling your audience? Basically, maybe without dumbing it down for them, letting us and thinking about it being creative. So if you were to give a speech about someone being homeless, your preview may be something of this sort. Maybe something like, the world, our society that we're living in has X amount of homeless people in it. Where are the shelters and where can these people get help and what can you do? Now that was a really kind of a weak preview because I just did it on the spot, but that's 3 points and I didn't use the words first, second, and third, okay? For the purposes of our speech, you're only going to have 3 points. Some of the speeches we watch throughout this semester will have more than 3 points. Know that, but for us, we're just going to do 3 points. So you have your intro, you have your attention getter, you have your thesis, and then you have your preview. After that, you have what's called a transition sentence. That's just a simple sentence that leads us from the next part of your speech, which brings us into the body. Think about your transitions as thinking about keeping them creative as possible. What's important? What's exciting? Maybe there's a statistic, maybe there's a quote. I had a student who did a speech on beer, on how to make beer, and it was fascinating. But what he did is that he didn't use just like, I'm going to move to how you make beer. He used quotes that kind of went directly with it, which was great. So use that. Think about it in that way. Then in the body, so you have your intro, and now we're in the second point, which is your body. In your body, you have your 3 main points. So you'll have your transition sentence, and then you'll have point number 1. Then you'll have all the subpoints under your point. The subpoints are up to you. That's how much you put in each speech. Think of it this way. If you have a 6 to 8 minute speech, it's going to be longer than if you have a 2 to 4 minute, a 3 to 5 minute. So think about that. After your first main point, you're going to have a transition sentence that leads us into your second main point. Then you have your second main point, and you have all the subpoints underneath. Then you have a transition sentence, which leads us into your third main point. Your third main point, all of your subpoints, then a transition sentence that leads us into the conclusion. Before I get to the conclusion, if you're writing your speech and you have one section, like one point or one thing of information that maybe is the weakest, put it in the middle. The middle, that's where people are going to kind of zone out, your audience. So we're going to talk about what strategies we can use to keep your audience engaged. One way is your transition sentences, and one way is knowing that they're probably going to pay attention to that first point, and they're definitely going to pay attention to the third point, but that second point they may zone. So if you have a weaker point, always put in your second point. So we have your intro, point 1 or first part of your speech, writing the speech, then you have your body, which is 2. Your conclusion is the third part to a third-part speech. The conclusion is the easiest part. You do not put any new information in your conclusion. It's everything that you said in your intro, but in reverse. So you're going to review your 3 main points. But you're not going to say, we learned, today we did this. You're just simply going to say it again. You know, our society lives in a world where there are hundreds of homeless people. We can make a difference. And now we know where the shelters are. Something to that degree. I didn't say word for word, but I reviewed what we learned. You want your audience to think, oh, this is where we need to go next. Then you're going to restate your thesis, not word for word, but in a different kind of format. And then you're going to tie back to your attention getter. So if your attention getter was a quote, then maybe you tie back to that quote. And you can say, Thomas Jefferson said, we must love everyone and make them feel important. I don't really think that's a quote. I just made that up. But you see where I'm going with that. All right, that's a 3-point speech, which is also listed in your lecture notes. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon.